Always good to be back on Saltspring. Thanks for having me again. So to contrast that quote that Pat just read, I'm gonna open up with a different kind of quote from Richard Dawkins, his 1976 book, The Selfish Gene. He writes, "We are survival machines, robot vehicles blindly programmed to preserve the selfish molecules known as genes. This is a truth which still fills me with astonishment." So these words filled me with astonishment when I read them about 30 years after they were first published. I remember reading the line a few times before pausing to ask myself, can it really be that simple? What could be more important than staying alive? Goals are irrelevant if we're not alive to pursue them, so it would seem that the ultimate goal is, indeed, to stay alive. The survival instinct can be seen at work in all living creatures, from microbes to mammals and everything in between, whether in the immediate short term or in the long term by way of reproduction. Organisms of every shape, size, and aptitude seem to be driven by this universal drive. Yet somehow, the more I thought about Dawkins' words, the more I pondered the question, the more doubt crept in. If living creatures really are blindly programmed to survive at all costs, how do you explain humankind's proclivity towards self-harming and self-destructive behavior? I single out our species because this behavior is virtually unheard of elsewhere. In fact, we observe self-harming behavior in other vertebrates only rarely, and only in the case of domesticated animals or those living in captivity. The death drive, it would seem, is a uniquely human trait, which we sometimes happen to pass on to our animal friends when they live too closely with us. Now, to me, this is far more astonishing than Dawkins' original proposition, and furthermore, it suggests that what Dawkins says is incomplete insofar as humans are concerned. We may be programmed to survive like every other living being on the planet. Our instincts might very well pull us in that general direction, but there's something in human beings that allows us to override nature's basic programming. For you and I, my friends, it appears that life isn't the ultimate end, but rather a means to some further end. Now, on some level, I think we all understand and appreciate this, especially those of us here who were lucky enough, I assume, to have been born and raised in this part of the world. For the majority of us here, I suspect survival has always been pretty much assured. And yet, despite this, many people today are gripped by countless cravings and desires. They're hungry, thirsty, yearning for something, anything, or in some cases, like my oldest, everything. And God forbid they get their hands on the object of their desire. That's when it turns to ash and leaves you craving for something else. Now, to me, the self-help phenomenon provides a good illustration of this. Here's an entire industry dedicated to helping people. With what exactly? With improving their lives, with helping them become better versions of themselves, and maybe even finding true happiness. But to me, this just begs the question, what's wrong with the way their lives are now? With the current version of who they are at the moment? And what is preventing them from being happy right here, right now? Here's an interesting tidbit about the self-help industry. It becomes more profitable with each passing year. Let you think about that for a sec. If the books and seminars and coaching sessions were helping people, you would expect the industry to gradually shrink over time. But in America alone, in the year 2008, at the height of a financial crisis, the self-help industry generated $11 billion in profits. And that was a 13% increase from 3 years before. So to me, these numbers present further evidence that Dawkins' opening statement falls short in our particular case. If we really are survival robots, then what kind of help are we seeking out exactly? The people investing their money in self-help books are all surviving. If that were the only purpose, they wouldn't be looking for more help. So it's clear There's more to life than simply staying alive. And whatever this missing ingredient happens to be, many of us definitely think it's missing. And that's quite a predicament, because it's not about survival. We're doing that better than any generation before us, my friends. Thanks to modern medicine, a growing understanding of human health, life expectancies keep climbing, while, paradoxically, satisfaction with life seems to be declining. So to sum it up, we're alive and unwell. Many of us don't like who we are or what we've become, what we do, or who we do it for. Some of us feel like spectators in our lives. We feel like we don't have enough, or like we aren't enough. And then depression, addiction, anxiety, these things just keep prevailing, and our attempts to cure them seem only to make matters worse. So what's the deal? This question has stalked me since 2013. In the spring of that year, I had an experience that was inexplicable in nature, a shift in my perspective, and I discovered that there was an entire world lying right in front of me in plain sight, and I had been ignoring it all along. Up until that point, I had been living in two dimensions. Though I lacked for nothing, and indeed counted many blessings in my life, I felt perpetually bored, dissatisfied, aimless. Life was flat, without direction or depth, rhyme, or reason. And then I was sitting at work, and this experience washed over me like a tidal wave and swept everything away. In its wake, I experienced a moment of silent awe, and then euphoria that lasted for about 6 weeks straight. Now, the obvious question is, am I having a mental breakdown here? What's happening? But I felt incredibly lucid, and I felt very grounded and stable. So after logging on to WebMD just to make sure I wasn't totally crazy, I decided to just go with it. And for the record, I'm still going with it, and that's why I'm here today. This event caused a shuffling of priorities and interests in my life. Hobbies were dropped, duties consolidated, all to make time for a new pursuit, figuring out what the heck happened to me that day. This hobby has led me through works of philosophy, science, psychology, and spirituality, and throughout it all, I've run into this question time and time again. If not survival, then what? Now, a few of my favorite psychologists offer consistent answers on this question. For instance, Carl Jung wrote, "A sense of a wider meaning to one's existence is what raises a person beyond mere getting and spending. If one lacks this sense, one is lost and miserable." Viktor Frankl, another favorite of mine, wrote at length about a widespread phenomenon he called the existential vacuum. Great name for it. He described it as the underlying cause of such conditions as depression and addiction, and he wrote the following: "Sometimes the frustrated will toward meaning is compensated for by a will to power, including the will to money. In other cases, the place of frustrated will to meaning is taken by the will to pleasure." So in other words, when we lack meaning and purpose, Frankl suggests that we will pursue power and pleasure. Sounds kind of familiar. Now, while studying suicide, the French sociologist Emile Durkheim described a similar condition that he called normlessness. The symptoms are virtually identical to what Frankl described, including what Durkheim calls the malady of the infinite. Insatiable desires that become more intense the more they are met. But honestly, it doesn't take scholars and academics to hit the nail on the head. There is wisdom in all of us, and the tribes of the Kalahari Desert bring it forth when they speak about the little hunger that hurts the belly and the great hunger that kills the spirit. Meaning, purpose, truth. In many ways, these things are as important as life itself, and in some cases, even worth dying for. I suggest that for many of us today, these are the missing ingredients. So where can we find them? Now, as always, I don't have conclusive answers on any of this stuff, but I do have a theory or two. For much of human history, it was the role of religion to deliver meaning, purpose, and truth to the masses. And until very recently, it performed admirably. Nowadays, though, many of these organizations have been exposed, revealed as corrupt or fraudulent. The literal interpretations of such stories as Eden and Noah, for example, have been discredited by scientific progress, and outdated moral norms are rightfully being abandoned across the world. These are all signs of progress in my personal opinion, but there are side effects. And Frankel's vacuum, the great void that fills us with uncertainty and fear, is one of those side effects. Nowadays, it's not uncommon to meet people who think that the world would be a better place if religion had never existed at all. People who would love to see all religions abolished because in their view such things are inherently harmful. On the other side, there are some who believe the only solution to our woes is to march backwards into the arms of yesterday's religions. I'm here today to suggest a middle path. As I see it, religion is a very useful device, sort of like a coat rack. It provides a solid structure upon which to hang beliefs, values, and practices that give our lives what they otherwise lack: a sense of meaning, purpose, and so on. The problem, as I see it, is that we've allowed others to dictate what gets hung on the coat rack and what doesn't. For some people, and I would say a great many people, if statistics on declining religiosity are to be trusted, for those people, this approach doesn't work anymore. So basically, atheists throw the baby out with the bathwater. Fundamentalists worship the bathwater and ignore the baby. And if the current state of affairs is any indication, neither approach is working very well. So let's explore a middle path, shall we? What I like to call the do-it-yourself approach. Each of us here has a coat rack. Somewhere in here, or maybe in here, depends on your style, I suppose. And ultimately, we get to choose what we hang on it. We've been taught and conditioned to believe that ideologies, whether political or spiritual, are to be absorbed wholesale or not at all. That we must accept an entire tradition as it stands, warts and all, or risk becoming cherry pickers. After my experience in 2013, as I began to explore different traditions in search of answers, I discovered certain recurring themes and insights. The golden rule: change is the only constant. As within, so without. And of course, my number one commandment, the most terrifying of all: know thyself. I kept reading and finding more and more of these overlaps, more and more consistency with the teachings and practices being put forth. I was astounded. There appeared to be a common thread, and it wove its way through philosophy and psychology, science and art. And I thought, what if I just borrow this one here and take that one there? What if I just absorb what aligns with my truth, what makes sense to me and what feels right to me, and discard the rest? Does that make me a cherry picker? Yeah, I think it does. I'll wear that label proudly. Early on in my journey, I stumbled onto these words from Walt Whitman. Quote, "There will soon be no more priests. They may wait a while, perhaps a generation or two, dropping off by degrees. A superior breed shall soon take their place. A new order shall arise, and they shall be the priests of humankind. And every person shall be their own priest." And I thought, yes, this is it right here. Why trust a middleman? Why rely on an external authority? Why not be my own priest and form my own religion? And so that's what I've been doing. Collecting principles and practices, establishing rituals, stitching it all together into a formal, structured, deliberate way of living life. Here's the downside to this approach. It's an extremely solitary pursuit. Even with meaning, purpose, and truth in abundant supply, part of me felt deeply lonely. I craved company on my path, a group of like-minded people, or maybe just a place where I might practice my private faith in good company. That's how I ended up on Google, searching up things like secular churches in Victoria and spiritual but not religious gatherings and things like that, until eventually I found the First Unitarian Church of Victoria and Unitarian Universalism as a whole. Now, as I read over the 7 principles on the website, it struck me that this was the perfect place for me. The 7 principles provide a solid foundation on which to build. Now, 4 years after becoming a member of my congregation, I see this more clearly. Unitarian Universalism is an amazing starting place, but by no means is it the final destination. There is more work to do, my friends, more construction to be done on this beautiful foundation that we have. If a religion is to survive in the years to come, if it's to thrive, I believe it must evolve and adapt quickly to meet the needs of our human family. And as I stressed at the onset, these needs are not physiological in nature. They're spiritual. The two-dimensional life hurts us deeply because we are three-dimensional beings by nature. Intuitively, we crave depth, meaning, a feeling of connection to something or someone greater than ourselves. And these things cannot be found in the 2 dimensions we currently inhabit. These things exist in a timeless place between places and time. Sorry, I don't mean to wax poetical, but we all have access to this hidden dimension. But whereas some of us find it by chance, like I did, and I was totally just lucky, there was nothing there that I did, I think others need a little bit more support, maybe a little bit of guidance. Our 4th principle encourages a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Well, what are we doing to assist our congregations on this search? What tools are we sharing with our friends in faith? How often do we explore together? Not as one leading another, but as fellow seekers seeking together. As I see it, we don't need a world without religion, nor a return to the religions of yesterday. We need a new religion. So I leave you with this question. Where do you see Unitarian Universalism 10 years from now? Good old job interview question, right? How about 20 years from now? Are we still around? Are we thriving? Or have we gone extinct like so many other religions seem to be doing? Now I ask, what can we start doing right now to ensure not only our continued existence, but our continued positive impact on the world?